I never thought I'd see the day a woman who stole from God's house would dare show her face here again. Guess shame isn't one of your prayers, huh, Laura? I heard it before I saw her. The words cracked across the field, and everything around me paused. The hayride's laugh track, the youth band's country riff, the squeak of the lemonade spigot. My hands tightened around the warm foil pan of pumpkin bars until the edges bit my palms. Emma stopped mid-step. Ben tucked himself behind her shoulder and stared at his sneakers. I turned. Helen Porter stood at the bake table in her pressed floral dress and perfect cardigan, a clipboard hugged to her chest like a badge. People drifted toward her voice the way they always did. The First Baptist Harvest Festival spread bright behind her. Rows of pie stands, scarecrows propped by hay bales, strings of pennants flapping above crock pots and cookies. It looked like a postcard. It did not feel like one. "Good morning," I said, because I didn't know what else to say that wouldn't shake. I set the pumpkin bars on the table, careful, 2 inches from the donation jar. Helen didn't lower her voice. "Don't good morning me, Laura. Some of us actually guard the Lord's blessings." A few women shifted to make a half circle. One whispered, "Is that her?" Another cupped a hand to her mouth and said, not quietly, "That's the one." A teenage usher stopped handing out programs. Even the friar at the hush puppy stand seemed to hush. Emma reached back, found my elbow, squeezed. "We'll just help and go," she said under her breath. Her thumb was shaking. Pastor Reed passed by the cider cooler with an apologetic nod that never made it to his eyes. "Morning, Laura," he said to the air between us, and kept moving toward the raffle table. His collar looked too tight today. Helen tapped the clipboard with a fingernail. "She took the donation money right before her divorce, remember?" She looked past me, past the table, as if addressing the flag. "Thieves don't sing in our choir." My mouth opened and closed. Heat climbed up my neck. A man I recognized from Sunday school, Tom with the straw hat, clicked his tongue. "Some people wear Sunday dresses to hide Monday sins." The youth band
Helen didn't blink. "The Spirit is truth, Pastor." Then to me, sweet but sharp, "You embarrass this church." I swallowed. The foil crinkled under my fingertips. "That's not—" "Save it," she snapped. "You fooled us once." Emma leaned toward me. "Mom, please." "People gave out of love," Helen continued, sweeping an arm toward the tables, "and you turned it into, what do they call it, a personal emergency fund?" "I heard it was $3,200, a woman said, not to anyone in particular. Thanksgiving drive." "More than $3,000, another confirmed, like she'd been there counting. "And we wondered why the pantry ran short last year." Ben flinched. The sound he made was small and broke something inside me. I put my hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," I whispered, though nothing was. A volunteer in a fall sweater edged the donation jar closer to her side of the table. A man in a camo cap nudged his daughter away from the cookies and toward another line. I caught the motion in my peripheral vision and felt it like a door closing. "Let's walk," I said to Emma and Ben. The words came out steady, and that surprised me. I left the pumpkin bars where they were. We took 3 steps. "Running again?" Helen called after us. "That's convenient." I stopped. Emma's grip on my arm tightened. Ben pressed into my side. I turned back just enough to see Helen's smile, polite and poisonous. "You want to talk about convenience?" I said. My voice was low. My ribs ached from holding in too much air. "Do it somewhere else." She laughed, the kind of laugh that invites an audience. It arrived right on time. "Oh, we'll talk," she said. "We'll make sure everyone hears." A little boy holding a balloon stared at me like I'd grown horns. His mother tugged him away, mouth tight. The balloon bobbed and bumped my shoulder. I stepped aside and bumped into Tom's straw hat instead. "Watch it," he snapped, like I'd stepped on his property. Emma's face had gone pale. She swallowed hard. "Mom, please," she whispered again. Pastor Reed put a hand up between us and Helen, not quite touching either of us. "Let's take this down a notch," he said, eyes fixed somewhere past my shoulder.
We're here to celebrate the heart.
Near the gate, an older woman with a bun and a fixed smile watched us approach. She set down her styrofoam cup and spoke to the ground in front of my shoes. "Some women never learn to be humble," she said, as if I were wind. I paused without meaning to. The sentence struck clean and left a hum. The woman turned away before I could respond, her cup leaving a faint ring on the folding table. Emma moved us along, a hand at my back. Ben walked stiffly beside us, jaw clenched. His steps were choppy, like his legs didn't match. At the car, my fingers fumbled the keys twice. I cursed under my breath, quiet enough for only the door to hear. I opened the back first, and Ben climbed in, buckling himself fast like it might protect him. Emma slid into the passenger seat and faced me, knees turned, hands on her thighs. I sat behind the wheel and closed the door. The festival sounds thinned to a muffled hum, the band, the friar, the rise and fall of a crowd that had already moved on. I stared straight ahead through the windshield at the string of pennants, their colors smudged by dirty glass. My pulse pounded in my ears. My hands loosened on the steering wheel 1 degree at a time. Emma's voice came out small. "Mom, why didn't you fight back?" I kept my eyes on the field. My tongue felt dry. "Because they'd call it proof I have no grace." The words tasted flat. Honest, but flat. Ben leaned forward between the seats. "They were mean," he said, loud enough to try to make it true. "They were," I said. "Buckle tight." He was already buckled. He pulled the strap tighter anyway. Emma shifted, looking at me like she wanted to fix something that didn't have screws. A motion at the edge of my vision made me turn. Helen stood in the distance with her clipboard under her arm, talking to 2 women I didn't know. She pointed in our direction once, and one of them nodded. None of them came closer. They didn't need to. I turned the key. The engine coughed and caught. I put the car in drive and then in park again because I needed 1 more second that didn't belong to them. I pulled off my name tag, volunteer, welcome, and set it face down in the cup holder. Emma watched me do it, then took off hers and handed it to me. I set it on top of mine. Ben tugged his loose. Emma reached for my hand. I let her hold it. Her palm was cool and dry. She squeezed twice, our old signal that meant I'm here. I squeezed back once. Me too. I didn't look back toward the bake table. I didn't need to see the foil, the jar, the clipboard, the faces. I had them, whether I wanted them or not. We drove off the church lot slow enough to be polite and fast enough to be done. Tires rolled over gravel. The field shrank in the rear view, and the pennants turned into a thin line of color on a stick. I breathed in, and it didn't catch. I breathed out, and it didn't shake. At the first stop sign, my phone buzzed on the console. I didn't pick it up. It buzzed again, longer. Emma glanced down. "It's lighting up," she said. "I see it." My voice stayed level. My shoulders dropped an inch. Ben leaned forward again. "Are we going back?" "Not today," I said. We turned toward home. The sky spread clean and bright over Cedar Valley. Lawns lay flat and trimmed. A neighbor dragged a trash can to the curb and paused mid-drag to watch us pass, then went back to his chore like we were just a car and not a headline. At the next light, the phone buzzed 3 times in a row, stacked vibrations like knocks. I pressed my palm to it to muffle the sound. The plastic was warm. Emma watched my face. "Mom?" I nodded once. "I hear them." My mouth pulled into something that might have been a smile if it had more practice. "If they want the crowd," I said, more to the windshield than to anyone else, "they'll get the truth." The living room was dark except for the light from my phone. The first ping sounded like a drip in a quiet house. Then another. Then a chain of them. Ping, 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 until my hands felt clumsy and my throat dried out. A blue banner climbed up the screen. "When greed hides behind faith." Under it, a photo from a Thanksgiving event 3 years ago. Everyone smiling around the pantry shelves. My face cropped crooked, like someone cut me out and shoved me back in with dull scissors. The byline sat heavy above the post. "Helen Porter, Faith in Action." The share counter rolled like a stopwatch. 20, 34, 58, 1. I stood up without meaning to and walked to the window.
The street outside looked normal. 2 porch lights, a passing car, the neighbor's plastic witch left over from last week's fall night. The vibration buzzed against my palm like a trapped fly. I pressed the phone to my chest to make it stop, but it didn't. "Mom?" Emma's voice came from the hallway. "It's late." I turned. She saw my face and didn't finish whatever she was going to say. "What happened?" I handed her the phone. She read silently, lips moving, eyes narrowing. Her shoulders went square and high. "She posted this?" I nodded. Her thumb flicked through the comments faster than I had. 400 shares? Her voice cracked. "They're saying you stole—" "Don't repeat it," I said too fast. "Please." Ben shuffled in, hair sticking up, rubbing his eyes. "Why is the house loud?" he asked, though the house wasn't loud at all. He looked at Emma, then at me. He saw the screen and took a step back like it burned. "It's nothing," I said. "Go back to bed." "It's not nothing," Emma shot back. "They're calling you a thief." She tagged the church group. "Mom, you can't let this sit." I swallowed. My mouth felt like paper. "Go lie down." She stared at me for a heartbeat and then pushed past me down the hall, as if movement would keep her from breaking. Ben hovered, unsure. I brushed his hair down. "Sleep," I whispered. "Please." When they were gone, I sat on the couch and scrolled. Faces I recognized flipped past. Neighbors, parents from the baseball team, a woman who'd asked me to bring casserole when her mother was recovering. They clicked share and added comments like they were adding napkins to a pile. I opened Messenger. A new message sat on top. "You embarrassed the Lord." Under it, another. "Repent before it's too late." The phone slipped from my hand and hit the couch cushion. I stared at it where it landed, at the bright rectangle and all the tiny voices inside it. I reached for it again, closed my eyes, opened them, and kept reading. Morning in the office didn't give me a break. I stepped into the break room with my lunch and the air shifted. 2 coworkers dropped their eyes to their salad. The copier coughed paper and jammed. I cleared it, blinking away a sting in my eyes. Someone's radio murmured a hymn in the next room, the kind people use to soothe babies. It sounded cruel in this building. When I got home, there was an envelope wedged in the screen door. No address, no stamp. 1 line inside in sharp block letters. "Repent before it's too late." No signature, no return. I carried it to the kitchen and placed it flat on the counter like it might shift if I looked away. The house felt heavier than it was. I opened a cupboard and stared at cereal boxes until the stillness pushed me back into the living room. I sat on the carpet, back against the couch, phone in both hands, jaw clenched. Emma came down the stairs with wet hair and a red rim around her eyes. "You saw what Kimmy posted?" she asked. She wrote "Thief's Daughter" under my choir photo. I reached for her and she folded in, stiff, like her joints locked. "I'm sorry," I said into her shoulder. Ben stood behind her in socks. "Mom?" His voice was careful, small. "Did we do something wrong?" I pulled them both close and didn't answer, because anything I said would either be too simple or too complicated. We stayed like that until the silence wasn't helping anymore. Then I sent them upstairs, and I sat on the edge of the couch and looked at the cross above the doorway. Later, I knelt by the bed the way I'd been taught. "Help," I said out loud. "Please." The only response was a digital one, brittle and bright. Ping, ping, ping. I turned my head and the screen blinked with 50 more comments, a thread that kept winding around the same few words until they didn't mean anything. Thief, shame, God, liar, disgrace, repent. I clicked the phone dark and put it face down. "This isn't God's judgment," I said to the empty room. "It's theirs." I lay there a minute that felt longer. I stood up and went back to the kitchen because I needed a thing to do that wasn't reading. The fridge motor hummed, the heater clicked. Every normal sound felt like a lid I couldn't lift. The next day at work, my chair felt lighter and my desk felt emptier. A sticky note had been slapped crooked on the back of.
Maybe apologize to quiet it down, he wrote again, like copy and paste. This will blow over if you stop making it bigger. I typed, apologize for what I didn't do? Dots appeared, paused, appeared again. It's not about truth, he sent. It's about peace. The screen showed seen 8:41 p.m. under my last message. My jaw worked. I stared at the word peace until it blurred. Then I held down the thread and hit delete. My thumb hovered over confirm. I pressed it and put the phone down like it might jump. The day stretched thin. Work ended. I drove home on muscle memory. At a red light, the notifications stacked in a cheerful line across the top of the screen. Likes, angry faces, share counts, names that used to smile at me at the deli. I didn't tap any of them. I kept my hands at 10 and 2 and watched the light go green. After dinner, the kids took their plates to the sink without being asked. Emma went upstairs to pretend to study. Ben asked if he could watch a show in his room and didn't wait for my answer. The house settled into evening. I sat at the table and traced a knot in the wood with a fingernail until the swirls smoothed out under my touch. I got up, walked to the hall closet, and pulled down a box labeled Taxes and MISC. Inside, a tangle of old file folders sagged toward each other. I set the box on the dining chair and lifted out a red folder with Food Drive 2021 scrawled in Sharpie. The flap came open with a papery sigh. Receipts slid out and skated across the table. I gathered them, stacked them, and let my fingers remember what order felt like. I carried the folder to the living room and opened my laptop. The screen woke up blue. The keyboard was cool. I typed in my password and a blank desktop filled with tiny icons. For a second, I just looked at the glow on my hands. Then I started to search. I clicked through old directories in a path only I knew. Cedar Valley/events/Food Drive 2021/docs. A row of file names stared back. Vendor receipts.pdf, cashlog_nav.xlsx, pantry_distributionlist.csv. I clicked one and then another. The pages turned under my cursor. I scrolled, I zoomed, I leaned in. Emma came down halfway and sat on the stairs, chin on her knees. She didn't say anything. I didn't either. The heater kicked again. The phone in the other room buzzed twice and then went silent. I kept reading. I found a scan with a familiar curve in the signature line. H. Porter. My chest tightened and then loosened in one motion. I ran my finger under the signature on the screen, like it could smudge. It didn't. The date lined up with a week the pantry had come up short. My breathing slowed. I took a screenshot because it felt good to trap something still. I opened another file, the same hand, another line item. I highlighted, copied, pasted into a new folder on my desktop. I didn't celebrate. I didn't speak. I clicked again, and the page flipped like it was waiting for me. Emma slid down another step. "Mom," she said softly. I nodded without looking away. "I'm here." Her voice steadied. "What are you doing?" I shifted in my chair. "What I should have done the first time someone lied," I said, but not angry, just clear. She didn't move. I didn't either. My eyes ran left to right across the screen, line after line, as if reading could make my body stop shaking. I made a new folder and named it Proof, then another, for Sunday, because labeling things put them back in my hands. I selected the first batch of files and dragged them over. A small window popped up. Copying 1 of 37, the bar crawled, slow but certain. My cursor hovered over a master folder I hadn't opened in 2 years. Food Drive, Archive. I clicked. Subfolders blinked into place. Emails, scans, photos. My heart thumped once against my ribs, then found a rhythm. In the top right corner, a button waited. Download all. I didn't rush it. I stared until the letters stopped looking like shapes and turned back into instructions. The room was quiet except for my breath and the whir of the laptop fan. Emma stood up fully now, one hand on the railing, watching me like a person coming out of anesthesia. I felt her there. I felt the house settle around us. I moved the mouse to the button. My hand didn't shake this time.
I clicked. The computer chimed once. Bright, simple, final. Sunday morning, I took the long way to the grocery store and still had to pass the church. First Baptist's lot spilled onto the grass. Potluck tables lined up like a county fair, kids running with paper cups of lemonade. I slowed at the stop sign and saw her, Helen Porter, at the entrance, spine straight, pearls bright, hugging a newcomer I recognized from Facebook. "Mornin', y'all! God's blessings on this fine day," she sang out. The newcomer nodded toward me without meaning to. I saw her mouth the words I had read on my screen 2 nights ago. Stealing from God's pantry. How low. My palms slicked on the wheel. Nails pressed half-moons into my skin. I rolled through the stop and muttered, "Still the same queen of purity," like saying it aloud could keep it from choking me. I parked at Pine Grove Market and grabbed a basket I didn't need. In the cereal aisle, 2 women moved their cart to make space and stayed blocking the shelf. "That's her," one whispered. "She looks fine for someone who lost that money," the other said, not bothering to soften it. "Excuse me," I said, and reached over them for the cheapest oats. The box slipped when I took it. I caught it against my ribs and held it there until my hands quit shaking. At the end cap, a clerk tried a smile and missed. Mrs. Bennett, you doing okay?" "I'm buying cereal," I said, softer than the anger wanted. At checkout, the cashier fumbled my receipt twice. "You can always donate again once—" A laugh escaped me, flat and short. I tightened my grip on the grocery bag before it tore and walked on. Back in the car, my hands wouldn't leave the 10 and 2 position. My shoulders ached from holding myself still. At the next light, I let my head drop forward and the memory slid in without asking. Same church, same smell of coffee and hymnals, 3 years ago. We were in the office after a bake sale. The donation lockbox sat open on the desk, envelopes stacked neat. I handed Helen a ledger. She didn't take it. She lifted an envelope marked Cash Donations, Youth Program, weighed it like fruit, and slipped it into her purse. "Just moving this for the flowers," she said, pleasant as napkins. "You know how the books get messy." "Shouldn't pastor sign off first?" Her smile didn't touch her eyes. "We all serve the same God, but some of us do it better." I'd gone quiet because I didn't know yet how to fight a person who blessed herself while reaching into a box. I carried the groceries inside and set them on the counter one at a time because it calmed my hands. The house was still. I poured cereal into a jar for later and ended up scrolling instead. On Facebook, Helen's latest post sat on top of everything like a sermon pinned to a door. "Grateful to serve our church with pure hearts and honest hands." The comments rolled in. "You're a light, Helen. God bless you for standing up for truth." Small hearts, prayer hands. Her friends tagging other friends. "See?" My finger hovered over comment. I closed the app and saw my reflection in the dark screen. Tired face, jaw hard, eyes wide open. "Pure hearts and honest hands. Sure," I said to the glass. The words didn't help, but they didn't hurt. My phone buzzed. Mark. Maybe just apologize to quiet it down. I stared. Apologize for what I didn't do? The dots bubbled, went away, came back. It's not about truth. It's about peace. "Peace built on lies isn't peace," I typed. The screen showed delivered. I set the phone down a little too hard and listened to the fridge hum like it was trying to mimic a calm house. By dinner, my jaw hurt from clenching. The 3 of us ate grilled cheese because that's all I could stand to cook. Forks.
Refund adjustment. Keep this between us. Sender, Helen Porter. Attachment, donation receipts. Signed. I clicked. There it was. Her handwriting on a form I'd scanned. Her signature curling at the end of the line. Her initials squeezed next to a number I knew too well. I didn't say anything for a second. I just breathed. My breath shook and steadied. I opened the next email. "Let's move the remainder after Easter." Another attached receipt. Another signature. Another date that matched the weeks the pantry came up short. My hand covered my mouth. It fell to the table. It went back up like my face needed holding in place. A soft knock. "Mom?" Emma stood in the doorway, hair damp, wearing my old choir hoodie. "I'm here. You okay?" I turned the laptop toward her and edged the chair back so she could see. "Look." She leaned in, eyes scanning, then narrowing. "Is that her name?" Every page. Every cent she moved, she finished for me, voice flat with something that wasn't shock anymore. We listened to the fridge run. The floor ticked as it cooled. Her knuckle tapped the desk once and stopped. "So what now?" she asked. I looked up at her. The heat behind my ribs had gone quiet. "Now?" We stopped letting her define grace. Emma didn't smile, but something loosened in her face. She pulled a chair next to me and sat. I created a folder on the desktop and typed proof, then another, receipts _signed. I dragged files in, one by one, because order felt like air. I took screenshots. I named each by date and amount. When my hand shook, I rested it flat on the desk until it didn't. "Mom," Emma said, tapping a subject line I hadn't opened. "FW, pantry, adjustment for flowers." I clicked. The body of the email was short. "Let's move the remaining cash to the arrangement fund. Keep it off the books for now. Forwarded to Deacon Tom." I exhaled once, long and quiet. "Print," I said. The printer woke with a whir. Paper fed through. The first page slid into the tray warm and faintly damp. I held it gently, like it might change if I squeezed. Emma passed me a clip. I stacked the pages and slipped. Ben peered in from the hallway, hair flattened from his pillow. "Still up?" he asked. "Homework," Emma said, which wasn't wrong. Ben nodded like that was a good answer. "Can I have water?" "Kitchen," I said, and he padded away. The faucet ran for a count of 4. He whispered goodnight on his way past, and I squeezed his hand without looking away from the screen. By the time the folder filled to 24 files, my shoulders had settled into a rhythm. Click, save, print. Clip, stack, label. I wrote proof on a manila folder in block letters and slid the pages inside. I didn't slam the drawer. I placed the folder in the top right corner of the desk and set a paperweight on it, the cheap glass one Ben made in art class with a blue swirl inside. Emma leaned back and stretched. "You look different," she said. "How?" "Less hunted." I breathed and let it be true. "Maybe." She stood, pressed a kiss to my hair, and took the empty mug to the sink. The printer hummed again. I fed it more paper. The sound was steady, clean. It filled the room in a way the pings never did. I opened one last email. Subject, volunteers. Scanned it, saved it, added it to the stack. My finger lingered over the trackpad. I closed the laptop, not in defeat, but because I had enough for tonight. I slid the printed receipts into the folder and smoothed the edge with my thumb. Warm ink smudged faintly on my skin. "Enough?" Emma asked from the doorway, lights low behind her. "For now." She nodded. "Good." We turned off the living room lamp. The house settled. The folder sat on the desk where we'd both see it in the morning. I put my hand on it like a promise, then pulled a breath all the way in and let it out slow. No speeches, no grand plan, just pages and names and totals that didn't lie. I didn't feel holy. I didn't feel mean. I felt clear, and for the first time in weeks, I slept. I was chopping carrots when the email came in. "We'd appreciate your presence at a brief meeting to clear misunderstandings. 6 p.m., fellowship room. Pastor Reed. Subject, community concerns." I read it twice. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Emma hovered in the doorway. "Don't go," she said. "They'll gang up on you." "If I don't show up," I said, grabbing my keys, "they'll say I'm hiding." By 6, the sun was sliding behind the steeple. First Baptist looked bigger than it ever had, quiet and stiff like it had swallowed its own breath. Helen's sedan sat in the front row like a reserved seat. I parked farther back, put both feet on the ground, and made myself walk. The fellowship room hit me with cold air and buzzing lights. A long late table. Folded chairs. Paper cups next to a coffee urn no one touched.
In the middle of the table, a Bible sat open to nothing in particular. Helen smiled with all teeth. "Laura, we appreciate you coming. We all want the same thing, truth." "That's all I've ever wanted," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I meant. Pastor Reed motioned me to the far end of the table. The seat felt like the kids' table at Thanksgiving. "Laura," Pastor began, gentle like he was calming a child, "the community is unsettled. They've seen things online. We just need clarity." "From me," I said, "or from the person posting them?" Helen's tone dripped honey. "You can't blame people for being upset. We all saw the evidence." "Evidence?" I asked. "You mean your Facebook post?" "I'm not talking about posts," she said, leaning forward. "People talk. You had access to the funds, didn't you?" "Yes," I said, my throat tightening. "As a volunteer." "Like you. Then perhaps you can explain where $3,200 went." "Helen," Pastor said, clearing his throat, "let's keep this respectful." "Respect is earned," she said, still smiling. Deacon Tom steepled his fingers like a banker approving a loan. "Laura, we can't risk the church's reputation." "It's not personal. People talk. Donations drop." "So I'm supposed to take the blame because it's convenient?" I asked. "Sometimes doing what's best for the church means swallowing personal pride," he said. Helen tilted her head in pity. "Maybe it's God's way of testing your humility." The lights hummed. My fingers dug around the cross at my neck until my knuckles blanched. Pastor sighed. "If you just make a short statement, something to calm people down, we can move forward." "A statement saying what?" I asked. "That I'm sorry for something I didn't do?" "You could say you regret any confusion," Helen offered. "It doesn't have to be a confession." My breath shook. "You want me to lie politely." "We just want peace," she said. "No," I said. "You want silence." The smile cracked. "Maybe spend that—" The hallway felt colder than the room. My steps echoed, quick and sharp. A bulletin board held flyers for Family Grace Dinner, Charity Revival Night, Men's Prayer Breakfast. A new page hung crooked. "Beware of false believers." Someone had scrawled underneath in blue pen, "Laura Bennett, shame to the church." My throat closed. Tears pushed hard. I took one breath, pulled the page down slowly, folded it into a square, and slipped it into my pocket like I was bagging evidence. Then I kept moving. Outside, the air cooled my face. I stood beside my car with the keys trembling between my fingers. Across the lot, the church doors opened, and Helen stepped out laughing with another woman. Their laughter skipped over the asphalt like pebbles. They didn't look at me. They didn't have to. I watched them walk under the glow of the security light. Fear loosened its grip, and something steadier took its place. Not rage, not yet, just something that wouldn't bend. I slid behind the wheel, gripped it until the leather groaned. The stained glass windows glowed behind me like a painting. I stared straight through the windshield. "You want truth," I whispered, my voice finally steady. "You'll get it." On the drive home, the car ticked with the blinker. Emma's text buzzed. "How did it go?" "They want peace," I typed. "I want truth." I looked at the words, nodded once, pressed send. At a red light, the church lights slipped out of the rear view. The road opened ahead, black and plain. The light turned green. I drove. The porch light flickered when I pulled in. I went straight to the table and dropped my purse. The envelope from last week still sat there, big black letters on the front. "Repent before it's too late." I flipped it over. Blank. I picked up a pen and wrote across the back, "Truth doesn't need repentance." My hands stopped shaking. Earlier that afternoon, before the meeting, I'd practiced saying nothing. By night, that skill felt useless. Emma met me at the kitchen door. "Mom?" "They suspended me," I said, hanging my keys on the hook. "For what?" Her voice climbed, scared and angry. "Existing," I said, "and not apologizing for it." She pressed her lips together, blinking.
I stared at it long enough to feel the first flash of heat. Apologize for what I didn't do, I typed. He took his time. Then, it's not about truth. It's about peace. Peace built on a lie isn't peace, I said out loud, and hit delete on the thread until his name disappeared. I sat at the table and pulled the folded bulletin note from my pocket. The paper trembled against my palm. I flattened it, then folded it again, this time cleaner. Emma watched. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Breathe," I said. "Then make them see what they refuse to see." She nodded like a soldier taking orders. "I'll help." "You already are," I said. The house hummed, fridge, AC, the small heartbeat of a place that refuses to break. I got up and poured water, took a swallow that hurt going down and didn't wince. My phone lit with another message, unknown number. "Sinners don't belong here." I set the phone face down and pushed it away. Emma slid a napkin toward me and a pen. "Write the date," she said, like she was suggesting a grocery item. I wrote it in the corner of the envelope with, "Truth doesn't need repentance." My hand stayed steady. The meeting replayed in pieces, the open Bible no one read, Helen's staged sighs, Pastor's soft, heavy voice asking for a statement, Deacon Tom's church as business tone. The part that stuck wasn't the suspension. It was Helen's whisper, the one with the blade in it. Maybe spend that free time repenting. I stood, took my keys again, and walked back to the door. Emma blocked me gently with a hand. "Where are you going?" "Nowhere," I said. "Somewhere tomorrow." I put the keys back. I just needed to feel them not in my hand. She half smiled, a shaky line turning solid. "You scared them, you know," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "When you stopped agreeing," she said, "they don't know what to do with that." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The hum of the fridge filled the silence with something simple and alive. I rinsed 2 mugs and set them upside down to dry. I wiped the table twice, even though it was clean. I turned off the kitchen light and listened to the click as the room fell soft. At lunch, I walked to the small park behind the office. The church steeple showed above the pines like a raised finger. I sat on a bench and pulled the folded bulletin from my pocket, smoothed the creases, and tucked it back away. A jogger ran past and nodded. I nodded back. When I got home that evening, the porch light didn't flicker. It burned steady. I put the kettle on and stood at the sink, staring out the window at nothing in particular. Emma's phone buzzed in the other room. Ben laughed at something on TV. The normal noises settled around me like a blanket I could finally hold still. I took the pen again, wrote one more line beneath the first. "You want truth? You'll get it." I put the pen down and listened to the house breathe. The hum was even, a rhythm I could follow. My hands didn't tremble, my jaw unclenched. "Okay," I said to the quiet room. "Okay." And for the first night in weeks, the word didn't hurt. I shut my bedroom door and locked it. The house had gone quiet after midnight. Emma's floor creaked once, then settled. Ben's game controller light blinked from under his door. I pulled the old laptop from the closet and set it on my desk. Dust rose, stung my nose, and stuck to my fingers. I didn't wipe it off. I pressed the power button and watched the fan struggle awake. The login screen popped up. My hands shook hard enough to miss the password twice. On the third try, it opened. Folders rolled down the screen like a drawer I hadn't opened in years. Choir rosters, food drive lists, budget spreadsheets, photos of smiling people holding pumpkins and paper plates. I didn't smile. I searched for food drive and hit enter. A long list appeared. Dates I recognized, the year before my divorce. I opened the first folder and clicked through. Donation ledgers, head counts, petty cash logs. I opened a PDF. A receipt blinked up in gray and white. Thanksgiving food drive, cash deposit. The signature line at the bottom stopped my breath. H. Porter. I leaned closer, heart thumping against the desk. I opened the next one. The same neat letters. Another deposit, same signature. I kept going. October, November, the exact weeks the gossip claimed I took the money. Every single slip had the same name. I pushed my throat tightened. I scrolled. Another thread. Deacon Tom looped in, and in the middle of that thread, a sentence that made my jaw lock until it hurt. Laura's the easy scapegoat. She already left the choir. I didn't think. I stood, grabbed the edge of the desk, and waited for the pulse in my ears to slow down. It wouldn't. I sat again and read the sentence 3 more times, each word scraping. I opened the attachments. More receipts. More tidy letters at the bottom. H. Porter. I pulled my phone from my pocket and snapped photos of the screen one by one. I didn't trust anything. I saved the PDFs to a separate folder, copied it to a flash drive, and then to the cloud. I checked the cloud twice, then dragged the same folder onto the desktop labeled Truth. My palm left a sweat print on the trackpad. I got up and poured water in the kitchen. My hands couldn't hold still. Water splashed over the rim onto the counter. I wiped it with a dish towel and stared at the clock on the stove. 1:42 a.m. The fridge kicked on. The house hummed. I walked back to the room and shut the door again. The printer sat on the floor, still half wrapped in plastic from when we'd moved. I plugged it in and felt stupid relief when the little green light woke up. The driver installed by itself. I tested a sheet. Emma's eyes in a school photo slid out, a little too dark. I swapped in the good paper. I printed the first receipt. The paper came out hot and a little curled. I laid it flat on the desk. I printed the second, the third, the email with the subject line about Easter, the thread with Tom, the sentence that branded me like a cattle tag. Laura's the easy scapegoat. She already left the choir. The machine buzzed and spat. Buzzed and spat. I stacked pages by date, clipped them with paper clips, then started over and printed backup copies. I wrote the dates on the top in blue pen, hand cramping, lines slanting. I put them in 3 piles: receipts, emails, sign-outs. I added a sticky note to each pile with a simple word: deposit, instruction, blame. The door opened behind me. Emma stood there in an oversized t-shirt, hair tied up, eyes puffy. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at the pile. She lifted her eyes. "I'm done praying for peace," I said. "I'm making them see it." Emma nodded once, jaw set. She sat beside me and started stacking pages by herself, careful and quick, like she'd been waiting to do something that mattered. She pulled the paper tray out and loaded more sheets without being asked. I watched her move and felt something settle deep in my chest. Not peace, not yet, just steadiness. I kept printing. The room warmed from the machine. The fan whirred on the laptop. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The pages spoke for us. I opened a folder labeled Volunteer Lists and found the cash handoff logs for the food drive nights. Signatures lined the page. Volunteers dropping envelopes, names of who received them. There she was again. H. Porter, received. Line after line. No Laura anywhere near those spots. I printed them all and circled each H. Porter in red pen. My hand finally steadied as the circles formed clean and even. The hallway light clicked on. Ben peeked in with messy hair and squinting eyes. "What's going on?" he asked, rubbing his face. "Proof," Emma said without looking up. He walked in and leaned his elbows on the desk. "Can I help?" "Sticky notes," I said, pointing to the pad. "Write the date and the word truth. Stick it on the top page of each pile." He grinned like I'd given him a mission. He wrote slow and careful, tongue between his teeth, and pressed each note down with both thumbs. After the third one, he glanced at me. "They were mean to you." I set a hand on his shoulder and squeezed. "They were wrong about me." He nodded and kept going. I moved through old bank deposit confirmations attached to emails. March, April, names, amounts, initials. I printed a comparison sheet, amount pledged versus amount deposited, then opened a spreadsheet and typed totals. My fingers tapped the keys in a steady rhythm. Pledged, 9,240. Deposited, 6,040. Difference, 3,200. I stared at the number. The same number Helen had posted on Facebook with my name under it. I printed that page and slid it to the top of the stack. I wrote "difference" in big letters across the top and underlined it twice. I opened a fresh document and pasted the clearest email sentence at the top so it would land first in any stack. Laura's the easy scapegoat. She already left the choir. I printed that alone and put it on top of the email pile. My chest rose and fell in a slow, heavy rhythm. My jaw unclenched for the first time in days. I didn't smile yet. I just felt solid. My phone buzzed on the desk. A late message from an unknown number. You should stop before you embarrass yourself. No name. The area code matched town numbers. I stared at it, then set the phone face down and turned the sound off. Emma looked up. Who was that? No one important, I said. She watched me for a second, then went back to aligning the corners of each set like a person setting a table straight. I filled a box with neat stacks, receipts, sign-outs, emails, totals. I added a cover page to each set with the simple word, proof. I taped the lid shut, then opened it again, then shut it once more. I wanted it ready, but I didn't want to feel done. I wasn't done. Not until the same people who stared at me over paper plates heard paper speak back. Emma stood and stretched her back. Mom? Yeah? What will you say when you show them? I thought about the market smell of the harvest field, the way Helen's voice carried across the hay bales and pie tables, the way Pastor Reed wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't rehearse. I didn't plan a speech. I looked at the stack on top, the one with the sentence that told the whole story. I won't say much, I said. They can read. Emma nodded. She reached for the lamp and dimmed it a notch. The room softened, but the papers stayed sharp and bright against the wood. Ben snored once and shifted. The printer light went from green to resting blue. I picked up one sheet at random and felt the heat of it still in the fibers. My hand stopped shaking. I set it down carefully and closed the laptop. We cleaned up quietly. Emma stacked the empty paper wrappers. I put the extra clips back in the drawer. I pressed the box lid exactly flat and slid the tape tight across it. The sound ripped the silence right down the middle, then stopped. I lifted the box and felt the weight of it. Not crushing. Honest. Emma touched my arm. You okay? I'm steady. The house settled like it was holding its breath. The stove clock read 10:30. The printer light blinked steady on the counter, and the old wall clock ticked a small, stubborn rhythm. I set the box of copies on the kitchen table and lifted the lid. Paper smell. Warm, a little sharp. Emma pulled out a stack and started counting without a word. Ben slid into a chair with a pad of sticky notes and a black marker. He wrote the first one slow, pressing too hard. Truth lives here. The marker squeaked. He stuck it on top of a bundle and looked up for approval. I nodded and handed him another stack. Emma fanned pages. Receipts, emails, sign-out logs. Her fingers moved quickly now, tapping the corners straight. She set one page aside and touched my wrist. You're shaking. I glanced down. The paper trembled between my fingers. I set it flat and wiped my palm on my jeans. Only because it's been too long since I stood up. She held my eyes a second, then kept stacking. The sink dripped once. Somewhere in the hall a vent kicked on. Ben leaned his weight on the lid of the next box like he was sealing something sacred. My phone buzzed face down on the table. I flipped it over. Church group screenshot sent by an unknown number. A comment circled in red. Thief doesn't belong in God's house. Another below it. Keep her out until she pays. Emma saw the screen, jaw tight. She pushed the box closer to me. Block them, she said, soft but clipped. I hit block and put the phone under a dish towel. I didn't want its light on the table with the papers. We worked in a rhythm. Ben's notes, Emma's counts, my clips. When a stack hit 50, I tied it loosely with twine and tested the knot with both hands. I put 3 stacks in each box and lined the lids beside them like shields. The printer hummed again as I ran the last batch. The pages slid out warm and clean, each one carrying the same neat signature that used to sound holy when she said her name out loud. Ben sniffed. Smells like a copy shop. It smells like Sunday, Emma said. I taped 3 more sticky notes on top of the hymn book guide I'd written. Front rows first, then aisles, then back. Emma raised an eyebrow at me. You made a map? Order helps, I told her. We carried the boxes to the car, one by one. The night air sat cool on my face. Somebody down the block was burning a candle that smelled like cinnamon. A dog barked once and then stopped. Our driveway gravel popped under our steps. We loaded the trunk and the back seat. Emma set one box up front with me and kept her hands on it like a seatbelt. I turned the key. The engine started low and calm. I backed out slow. The street lights stretched long across the hood. If anyone looked out a window just then, they'd see a mom and her kids going somewhere late with boxes. They'd make up a reason, because people always do. Emma watched the road and kept her voice level. We should start with the large print hymnals. Older folks grab those first. Good, I said. Left vestibule. Ben craned his neck to see the church steeple as it rose over the trees. Do we go in the front? Side door by the choir room, I said. Less squeak. We rolled into the parking lot. It was mostly dark, that church dark that hangs heavier than night outside it. One security light threw a wide circle on the grass. The Brit glowed soft, almost kind. I pulled into the far space and killed the engine. For a second, none of us moved. Emma broke the stillness. Mom? Yeah? She swallowed. If someone's there, we leave. We try again later. Agreed. I handed her the first box. Stay behind me. Ben reached for the second box. I put a hand on it, then on his shoulder. You're staying in the car. He straightened up, wounded. I can help. You already did, I said. He looked like he might argue, then pressed his lips together and nodded. Lock the doors. If anyone pulls in, you text us and keep the lights off. He held up his phone and nodded again. We stepped out. The night touched my face again, cooler now. Gravel. My boots pressed a line of small crunches. Emma's steps fell half a beat behind mine. The side door sat in shadow. I pulled the handle. It gave. Of course it did. God's house is always open. Inside, the air smelled like old wood and lemon polish. The tile underfoot held the day's warmth. A candle burned low near the front. Someone must have left it after a wedding rehearsal or prayer circle. Halfway down the first pew, a car passed on the street outside. Headlights washed across the stained glass. I froze. Emma froze. The shadows shifted, then settled. I let out a slow breath and kept going. We reached the second row. I brushed the back of the pew with my hip and almost dropped a stack. Papers slid sideways. My hand shot out and caught them by the edge. Emma steadied the book and looked at me like she was ready to pick me up off the floor if I asked. I shook my head and grinned. A quick flicker of teeth I couldn't help. We kept moving. At row 5, we could hear the building breathe. Air through vents, wood cooling, a pipe in the wall ticking. I opened a large print hymnal and felt the cracked spine give under my palm. I slid the email under page 92. Same page the pastor loves, the one everyone turns to without thinking. The corner of the paper peeked out. I pushed it deeper and closed the cover. Footsteps clicked on tile somewhere beyond the hall. Not ours, not Ben. I held my breath and put a hand out in front of Emma. The footsteps stopped. A door creaked low and then settled. We stayed still. I felt my heartbeat in my neck. Emma's eyes went wide, but her mouth stayed firm. 30 seconds. Maybe a minute. We heard nothing else. I leaned closer and whispered, "We're okay." We went back to work. We finished the left side, then crossed the aisle. A hymn book slid from the pile and thumped on the seat. The sound cracked across the sanctuary like a slap. I flinched and caught it quick, fingers sinking into the worn cloth. Emma winced, then breathed out slow. We kept going. Ben texted, "You good?" I wrote back one word, "Working." We hit the back rows. Dust shimmered in the candlelight, tiny floating pieces of people who'd sat here and sang and judged. I didn't think about them long. I pushed the next set of papers into the book and closed it with a firm, quiet click. Near the choir area, I paused at a hymnal with a child's drawing tucked inside. Blue crayon cross, lopsided and brave. I left it where it was and slid our paper behind it, careful not to crease the drawing. Emma watched and nodded once. On the last row, my fingers stopped shaking. The stacks had thinned. The box on the floor showed "Yeah." She watched my face. "You okay?" "Steady."
Her shoulders dropped a fraction. She lifted the box lid one more time as if to double-check that we hadn't missed anything, then closed it quietly. We stood by the threshold, the sanctuary behind us full of breath and paper. My voice found that small, calm place it hadn't touched in a long time. Let truth pray for itself. We stepped into the hall. The candle's glow thinned, but still touched the edge of the piano. We moved down the corridor, shoes soft on the tile, hearts louder than our footsteps. The side door handle was cool under my palm. It opened with a gentle sound, like a book closing. Outside, the night held the same shape it had when we arrived, but it felt different against my face. Emma and I crossed the lot with empty hands and quick steps, gravel under our soles. The car sat like a promise. Ben's head popped up in the back seat, eyes bright, thumbs flying on his phone. "All clear!" Emma slid into the passenger seat and hit the lock. The sound was small, but final. Her breathing spiked, then slowed. I gripped the wheel without turning the key yet. The church sat behind us, tall and quiet. I watched the side door through the rearview mirror. The lot stayed still. I turned the key. The engine caught. Emma's pulse thudded in the silence, and I could hear it as if it were my own. I backed out slow, checking the mirror once more. The brick, the glass, the candle's faint glow through a sliver of stained color, all of it pulling away, inch by inch. We drove toward the road. I kept my eyes forward, then glanced once more at the mirror as the building slipped into the dark. The bell rang once and let the morning breathe. Sunlight slid through the stained glass and pooled on the aisle. Emma and Ben sat tight against me in the back pew. I kept my hymnal closed and my hands still. My skin felt cool where the wood pressed my wrists. People filled the rows in their Sunday coats and friendly smiles that didn't reach their eyes when they glanced my way. I watched their shoulders tilt toward each other, watched whispers dry up when I looked up. The choir filed in. Robes brushed the floor in a soft line. Helen already had her front pew, chin lifted.
Pastor Reed cleared his throat. Please turn to page 92 for our morning hymn. Pages rustled like a small storm. The sound rolled forward and back. Then it stopped. Not all at once. A stuttering, spreading pause. A woman coughed once and didn't finish it. The piano hung on a note. Emma gripped my hand under the pew. Her fingers were cold. Ben leaned forward to see past the people in front of us. A man 2 rows ahead blinked hard at the paper tucked in his book. His lips moved as he read. He stood up without closing the hymnal. "Is this real?" His voice carried far because the room had gone so quiet. He held the page up, clean and white against the red cloth of the book. The pastor didn't answer. No one did. The man turned it in his hand, eyes skipping lines. "Keep it off the books." Another voice from the right aisle. "Her signature's right here." A woman with red nails lifted a receipt between 2 fingers, as if she didn't want to touch it and couldn't let it go. The choir shifted on the risers. Robes whispered. One alto leaned to another and pointed to the page in her hands. I remember her taking the envelopes that day. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. I felt my fingers clamp down on the hymnal. Knuckles paled. Emma pressed closer. Ben didn't blink. A ripple of paper moved through the room, pages flipping back and forth, eyes searching, mouths tightening. A boy near the aisle frowned and whispered, "Mom?" She pulled him close without looking away from the words. Helen laughed. It came out thin. "Those are doctored." She tried to stand and sit at the same time, knees bumping the pew, purse sliding off to the floor. She fixed it with sharp movements and faced the pastor like he could bless this away. "This is slander." I rose slow enough to feel my knees, then straightened. Every step of air between us felt heavy, but my voice didn't. "Check your own handwriting." Helen's mouth opened, then closed. She looked down at a page someone held out to her, and then at her hands like they might deny it for her. Her husband reached for her elbow. She shook him off and shoved the book at the woman in the next pew.
Pastor Reed's eyes moved from the congregation to the paper the man still held high. Then
A deacon at the back leaned into the aisle, glasses low on his nose, reading a printout like it might light up. A gray-haired woman way up front took off her gloves finger by finger and smoothed the paper with her bare hand, as if the truth needed help lying flat. Two teens on the left snapped their heads together and whispered, and their mother tugged their sleeves and shook her head once, hard. I didn't speak. I didn't move. Emma slipped her arm through mine. Ben's shoulder touched my side. The choir director lowered her hands until her wrists rested against her robe. The pianist lifted his fingers from the keys and set them in his lap, eyes on the music he didn't play. The church felt like it had soaked up the sound and was holding it hostage. Helen found her voice and threw it like a stone. "You planned this." Her eyes hit me and stuck. "You came to ruin worship." I kept my hands where they were. "I brought receipts." She laughed again, but it cracked. "You forged—" The man in the center cut in without looking at me or her. "This came from the office email." He read the header and then the line in the middle, slow and exact. "Laura's the easy scapegoat. She already left the choir." The words turned over in the room like a heavy object changing hands. One by one, people read them and then read them again. The sound of paper smoothed, refolded, passed hand to hand, rose and fell like breath. The alto on the end of the second row spoke up. "I gave my envelope to Helen." She turned around, scanning faces until she found mine. "That day. She said she'd handle deposits." Helen drew herself up, but her shoulders wouldn't stay square. Deacon Tom pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose and didn't look at anyone. Pastor Reed tried again, voice smaller. "Helen, is this true?" She's always had a good church face. It didn't fit today. Her mouth fought to hold shape. Her eyes flashed through anger, turned to plea, then settled on steel she didn't own anymore. "That woman," she said, jabbing a finger in my direction. "She hates this church. You taught my daughter to sing," I said, "and then you called her mother a thief." Emma's breath wobbled. Her fingers dug into my sleeve, and I let her. Ben stood up because he couldn't stand not standing, and his knee hit the pew and I realized my jaw hurt. I loosened it. The hymnal edge had printed a pale line across my palm. I looked at it, and then at the book in front of me. I opened it to page 92. The paper I'd placed there lay patient and ready. It didn't bow or bend. It didn't shout. It just existed where everyone could see it. The choir director whispered to the sopranos, "Close your books." Books closed, one after another, a soft percussion that moved across the room. No one stood to sing. The piano bench creaked as the pianist shifted and then sat completely still. A little boy waved his paper like a flag until his father pressed the hand down gently and shook his head. The boy frowned and then held the paper flat with two palms. Helen tried for one more edge. "You want a show?" "Is that it?" The words scraped. "You've always loved attention." I didn't answer. Emma lifted her chin. Ben swallowed hard and didn't break eye contact with the front pew. A breathy laugh from the back. "Attention found you today." Pastor Reed closed his eyes and opened them again. Let's keep our words kind." He looked at me, then at Helen, then to the paper in the center aisle. This belongs to the board." "Board?" someone said. "We are the church." Silence fell again, thicker. The candle on the communion table wavered and steadied. In the far left row, an elderly man reached for the pew and pulled himself up with a soft groan. He turned and faced the room, holding a copy close to his chest. "We do right," he said. His voice shook but didn't break. "We do right, even when it burns." Helen stared at the floor. Her heel tapped twice and stopped. She lifted her face toward the windows like the glass would give her an answer, then brought it back to the paper in front of her. Her eyes moved over it and kept moving, refusing to land. Pastor Reed didn't move from the pulpit. The tips of his fingers were white where they held the wood. "Helen, is this true?" Her breath sounded loud. She shook her head once, a small movement that meant nothing. One of the ushers took a step forward and then stayed where he was, hands at his sides. A murmur ticked at the edges of the room and pulled back. The church morning came with the town already talking. I heard it before I got to the porch. 2 women on their walk stopped at my mailbox and stared at the folded paper on top. The headline sat big and plain: Deacon's wife misused church funds. One of them looked at me, then looked down. The other whispered, "Lord." I didn't answer. I picked up the paper, pressed my lips tight, and felt them finally loosen. My phone buzzed until the counter hit 99 plus. I set it face down on the kitchen table and poured cereal for Ben. He ate like boys do, quick and messy, milk on his chin. Emma scrolled, eyes wide, then put her own phone away like it weighed too much. The local news played in the living room. The anchor read the headline again: Deacon's wife misused church funds. No spin, no soft edges, just the words that should have been spoken months ago. I stood there with a dish towel in my hands and didn't move until the segment ended. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Mrs. Whitaker from 2 houses down. She held a plate of cookies under a sheet of plastic wrap. Her hands shook. She lifted it up like an offering. "I was wrong about you, Laura." My throat warmed. I took the plate with both hands. "Thank you." She nodded, eyes glossy, and walked back down the steps without making small talk. The plastic crackled under my fingers. Emma slid beside me and lifted the wrap. "Chocolate chip," she said, voice light for the first time in weeks. By noon, the church's Facebook page pinned a post: "We failed to protect the innocent." The comments poured in and kept going. People screen-capped the apology and sent it to me like it might not be real unless it lived in my text thread. I still hadn't answered anything. At the office, the whispers didn't come with me to the copier. They came to a full stop at my cubicle. Linda from Claims set a paper cup on my desk. "This one's on me." Steam rose between us. I nodded, both hands around the cup to steady them. She didn't try to fix anything with words. She just stayed there a second and squeezed my shoulder. I walked past the break room and saw 2 agents take down an old printed meme about honesty at work. Someone had written my name across it last month, small enough to deny if... At 3, Pastor Reed called. I watched the screen blink his name and let it ring out. A voicemail landed. I didn't press play. Not yet. At 4, a message from the church board landed in my email. Formal, stamped, signed by 3 names I recognized. "Effective immediately, Helen Porter and Deacon Thomas Porter have resigned their positions. We are initiating a full financial audit." The font looked stiff, like they had ironed the paper before sending it. My hands stopped shaking. The mouse sat quiet under my palm. On the way home, I drove past First Baptist. The parking lot held small knots of people talking in low voices. No one waved me in, no one waved me off. A teen boy pointed to his hymnal as he talked to his mom. She shook her head, then hugged him fast, right there by the curb. Ben picked out his Cedar Valley Church t-shirt after dinner. He hadn't touched it since the Harvest Festival. He slipped it on, smoothed the front, and stood taller without trying. "You sure?" I asked. He nodded hard. "It's mine, too." Emma laughed at something dumb on TV and didn't cover her mouth or check the volume. It filled the kitchen and bounced off the cabinets like it belonged there. I wiped the counter slow, letting the sound carry. Another knock on the door. The neighbor who left the repent envelope stood with his hat in his hands. He had a shy look I'd never seen on his face. "I was wrong," he said to the porch boards. "About you." I held the door open. He didn't come inside. He didn't offer excuses. He kept his eyes down and gulped air like he'd run to get here. "I said things I shouldn't have." I nodded once. "Thank you for saying that." He took a breath that shook and walked back across the yard. No hugs, no promises. It was enough. After he left, I finally tapped the church post to read it all the way through. The words were simple. No dressy scripture, no hedging. "We failed to protect the innocent." I read it aloud to the kitchen, just once. Emma set down a dish and listened like it was a song she knew. My phone buzzed again. Mark's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it. I let it go dark. He texted instead. "Mark, you proved them wrong." I watched the dots pulse while he waited. Emma glanced. The evening cooled off. I walked out to the porch with the newspaper under my arm, and the cookie plate returned to Mrs. Whitaker, wrapped with one of Emma's thank you notes. The street lay still. A kid across the way rode a scooter up and down the sidewalk and waved when he saw me. I waved back. The sky settled into the kind of light that makes you stop talking without planning to. Cars rolled by slow. No one yelled, no one stared like I was a headline. A couple from church passed with their dog. They slowed at my steps. "We're sorry," the woman said, eyes full but steady. Her husband nodded, voice rough. We saw what we wanted. I rubbed my hands on my jeans and nodded back. "Thank you." They moved on without asking for a conversation I didn't have in me. The dog sniffed my mailbox and trotted after them, tail wagging. My phone buzzed again on the porch rail, a message from the choir director. "If you ever want to sing again, we'd be honored." I read it twice. My chest lifted, then settled. I didn't answer. Not tonight. A sliver of orange light caught the Porter mailbox across the street from the church. Their blinds were drawn. No cars, no footsteps. It was the first time in months that house didn't look bigger than it is. Emma came out and sat on the top step with 2 mugs. "Hot chocolate," she said, like she was 12 again. We drank without talking for a while. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Ben cracked the door open behind us and asked if he could ride his bike to the end of the block. "Stay where I can see you," I said. He pedaled slow back and forth. The wheels made a soft hush on the pavement. Each turn loosened something inside the day. My phone lit again with a stream of group chat screenshots. People were deleting old comments from last night, one by one. Someone wrote, "I'm ashamed." Someone else wrote, "We owe her." The admin posted a reminder about kindness and accountability at the same time. I didn't hit like. I didn't reply. I watched the bubbles appear and disappear until the screen went still. Inside, the dishwasher hummed and clicked. The sound filled the house like a metronome set to normal. I breathed with it. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Steady. Another text. This one. The porch light flicked on as the sun dipped. I didn't flip it myself. The timer did it. A small thing taking care of itself. I sat back in the chair and let my hands fall to my knees. The newspaper slid to the floorboards, headline up, ink a little smudged from my thumb. From inside the house, the landline rang. I let it. The answering machine picked up and played Pastor Reed's voice into the empty room. "Laura, we are so sorry." He spoke slowly, like he wanted each word to land. "We want to make this right." The message ended with a long breath that scraped the speaker, then a beep. I didn't walk in to play it again. I didn't reach for the phone. I stayed outside with my kids and the quiet street and the taste of chocolate cooling on my tongue. Emma set her mug down and wrapped her arms around herself. "You cold?" "A little." "Go get a sweater." She stood and paused at the door. "You okay?" "I'm getting there." She smiled, small and real, and went inside. Ben coasted to the curb and planted both feet. He looked at the sky like he was trying to measure it. Then he shoved off and rode past the mailbox, past the end of our yard, and circled back with easy balance. My phone lit one last time. "Mark, proud of you." I didn't write back. I watched the message glow, then fade. I set the phone down, stood, and leaned on the porch rail. A breath moved out of me, long, steady. Not a prayer, not a speech, just air leaving a body that finally had room for it. The street breathed with me. I picked up the phone again, typed the reply to his earlier text, and kept it simple. Me. Truth did. I placed the phone on the rail, stepped off the porch, and walked to the edge of the yard. The grass cooled my ankles. The neighborhood lay quiet and sure. I didn't lift my hands. I didn't raise my voice. I let the silence do its work. Sunday came easy. The air felt clean, like the street had been rinsed overnight. I drove with both hands on the wheel, Emma beside me, Ben in the back humming the first line of a hymn he barely remembered. The church rose ahead the way it always had, brick and simple, sitting right where it sat when they called me a thief. I parked in the same row I used to avoid. We walked toward the steps. My palm touched the handle. 3 aisles over, a man who used to cut sideways at me with his eyes stepped closer. hat in his hand, as if he'd practiced this in the mirror. "Good morning, Laura." "Good morning," I answered. He seemed surprised by how easy it came out of me. He nodded and found his seat. The choir filed in wearing their robes. The organ warmed with a low breath. Pastor Reed stepped from the side door and paused like he wasn't sure if his legs would take him any farther. He crossed the aisle anyway. He didn't speak from a distance. He came to our row and leaned down. His eyes shone in a way I hadn't seen before, less tired, more human. "I'm sorry," he said. No extra words, no defense. I stood and met him. We all serve the same truth. His shoulders loosened. He squeezed my hand once and returned to the pulpit. Announcements rolled by, the soup drive, the youth retreat, the list of names who needed prayer. No one said my name. They didn't need to. I reached into my bag and lifted a new hymnal I'd bought with my own money. Clean cover, no folded papers inside. I walked it down the aisle. People watched but didn't whisper. At the altar, I set it on the table, pressed my palm to the spine, and left it there. Nothing secret, nothing hidden. I walked back to my seat with my hands empty and light. The music began. Amazing Grace. Emma's voice joined first. Steady, warm, like it always is when she's not trying to impress anyone. Ben came in shy, then stronger. I felt my breathing slow to match the rise of the notes. When the line came, "Was blind, but now I see," I closed my eyes, not to show anything, just to listen. Someone behind me sniffed. A robe sleeve brushed the pew. The organ held one tone longer than usual and found its footing. My throat ached in a clean way, like I'd been holding back a cough for too long and finally let it out. After the hymn, Pastor Reed didn't preach long. He read a short passage about bearing one another's burdens, then folded his Bible. No lecture, no warnings. The service ended with a prayer that asked for gentleness, and this time the word didn't sound thin. As we stepped into the aisle, a little girl with a pink bow waited near the end of the pew. She held a daisy with a broken stem and the kind of concentration kids put into big moments. "Mom said this is for you," she said, eyes wide. I took the flower in both hands. "Tell her I said thank you." She nodded hard enough to shake her bow and ran back to her mother. The woman lifted a hand from across the aisle, a quiet wave. I waved back. We moved slowly toward the doors. People kept space but didn't avoid us. One man cleared his throat like he'd come to say something important, then decided a nod was enough. An usher squeezed my elbow once and let go. The sunlight in the lobby made the floor look too bright. Ben squinted and laughed and bumped my hip with his. On the front steps, the air brushed my face. Emma shaded her eyes and looked up at the clear sky. "Pretty day," she said. "It is." Pastor Reed stopped at the top step and watched the parking lot empty. He didn't call down to me. He just lifted a hand in a small, grateful sign and went back inside. I felt something settle that had been knocking around in my chest since the festival. The thing that makes you over-explain, over-apologize, over-breathe. It sat down and stayed quiet. We walked to the car. A friend from work crossed the street with her toddler and gave me a side hug. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. No stage voice, no spotlight. I unlocked the car and paused with my hand on the door. Bells rang from somewhere downtown. Not loud, not triumphant, just the hour. Emma leaned on the roof. "Want breakfast at Lula's?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I do." Ben jogged ahead and called dibs on the front seat, then saw his sister's look and opened the back door with a little bow. "After you." She laughed. It sounded like home. I slid the daisy into the empty cup holder. It bobbed with the movement, fragile but upright. I started the engine and let it idle while I watched families cross the lot and head for their cars. No one rushed. No one chased me down. A quiet Sunday doing what Sundays do. We pulled away from the curb. The church shrank in the mirror but didn't disappear. I didn't turn the radio on. I rolled the window down the smallest crack and let the air move. At the light, I glanced at Emma. She was texting someone, smiling small.
Ben tapped a rhythm on his knees and stared out at the feed store, counting the blue flags hanging in the window. I didn't give them a speech. I didn't need to. We passed the Porter house and didn't slow. Curtains drawn, porch clean. I kept my eyes on the road. 2 blocks later, I parked in front of Lula's. The doorbell chimed when we stepped in. Lula looked up from the counter like she'd been expecting us. "Your usual?" she asked. "That'd be nice."
We slid into a booth. The vinyl hissed and settled. I laid the daisy on the table and smoothed the pedal with my thumb. The waitress poured coffee without asking and set orange juice in front of Ben. He drank it in 3 gulps and wiped his mouth on his sleeve. Emma rolled her eyes and handed him a napkin. Lula delivered pancakes the size of a plate and bacon that snapped clean. We ate like people who hadn't had a proper breakfast in months. No one mentioned Facebook. No one said Helen's name. Emma told me about a school project she'd been putting off. Ben tried to guess how many pancakes he could stack on his fork. I told him not to try. He tried anyway. 1 fell. He caught it with his palm and looked proud. When the check came, Lula tapped it with a painted finger. "Already covered," she said, and winked toward a couple leaving by the window. They didn't turn around. They didn't need thanks. I left cash under the sugar caddy anyway. Outside, the wind had picked up. I stepped onto the sidewalk and tipped my face up to it. No grand gesture, just air and skin and the sound of cars rolling by. Emma slipped her arm through mine. Ben kicked at a leaf and missed, then laughed at himself.
We drove home with the daisy still standing. I pulled into our driveway and cut the engine. The street was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes a place feel safe again. On the porch, I took one last look toward town. My voice came out low, steady. "If truth makes me godless," I said, "then I'm finally free." Emma didn't ask what I meant. She just leaned her head on my shoulder. Ben leaned on my other side because he hates to be left out. We stayed like that for a long minute. No sermons, no speeches, just the 3 of us breathing the same air. If you felt this story, tap like so it reaches more people. Subscribe for the rest of the series, and tell me in the comments, which moment hit you hardest and why?